Hi, Dave Scotland for cgswot.com, and today's tutorial we're going to have a look at this underwater scene, and it's entirely created in After Effects. And as you can see, we've got some volumetric light rays. The scene itself was supposed to be sort of almost a moonlight bleeding through the water's surface. We've got some wave animation happening on the water's surface up here. And we've got our fish. We've also got the floaties to help to add a bit of realism. And the fish you'll see are disappearing off into the distance there, a bit of depth. And we'll be using the image here, and it's just an image that I grabbed from Google Image of a tuna. And then I'm going to I've taken it through Photoshop just to create a mask for it, and alphaed out that background. Okay, so that's the effect we're going for, and we'll get started. So the first thing we need to do is break up our tuna image and get it to swim. So with the tuna layer selected in the project window, let's drag it down to the composition button, and that creates a composition the size of our tuna. And what we'll do is just go into the composition settings and reduce the length of the composition to 40 frames, and as 25 frames per second square pixels is correct, that's okay, and we'll click OK to that. So we've got our 40 frame composition happening there, and the first thing we need to do is to break this tuna up a little bit with some masks. So if you use your rectangle mask tool, we want to draw, or actually we'll double click on the rectangle mask tool, which will create a mask, and then with it selected we'll go Control T, and that allows us to drag our mask in. And just so that we can see what we're doing, we're just going to switch our mask to none and hit Control T again to bring up our scaling. And we want to just go just outside the fin at the back here. About there is fine. And we also want to drag our mask top and bottom a little larger, and a little bit further out there as well. And that's okay for that mask. Now, just so that we can follow what we're doing here, we're just going to change the color of that mask to a red color, and we're going to duplicate the mask, Control D, and we're going to Control T that mask, and then if we grab just the left hand side and drag it across, that will leave them lined up in the center there. And we're just going to put it just about there where the tail meets the body, and we'll change the color of that mask to a blue, and then we're going to Control D on that mask again, and Control T to bring up our transform, and do the same again, and this time go out beyond the image, and we'll change the color of that one to a green. Okay, so we've got our three masks. We're going to duplicate our layer twice, Control D, Control D. Now with the top mask we're going to leave as the head of the fish, so the only mask we need is the first red mask. So we'll just isolate that layer. We'll take mask 3 on the top layer, delete, mask 2, delete, and switch the mask to add. Now the second part of the fish is going to be this middle body part, and the only masks we need is the blue. So delete the red, delete the green, and switch the mask to add. And the third part of the fish is the tail. So we can delete the red and the blue mask and switch that on just to make sure we can see what we're doing there, and add. Now if we switch all three layers on, we've got the whole fish, nothing but the fish. So if we turn the first layer on and we go to our mask settings and bring up our feather settings, let's give it a feather of about 20. And we'll do the same with the second chunk of tuna. Bring up our feather settings, set it to 20. And notice that we're getting a little bit of dark because of that feather. So we're going to play with the mask expansion a little. And we're just going to increase it. Go +10. And on the top fish as well, go 10. And on the very last mask, we're going to expand it by 10 and give it a feather of 10. And that's just about it for the masking. Switch all those back on. We'll get our fish there. Now the next thing we need to do is just make some adjustments to the pivot points of these layers. So select our first tuna, use our pan behind tool and drag the pivot point over to right on the edge of that mask. Select the second tuna, so the second layer, and drag the pivot point right on the edge. Actually, the first one should be up here at the head of the tuna. The second one is here on this line, and the third one is right here on this line. And what that allows us to do is rotate. If we switch these to 3D layers with our toggle switch here and switch all to 3D layers, we can now rotate at the tail or at the body part there. So we're just going to do a little bit of parenting. We're going to take our bottom layer, which is the tail, we're going to parent it to the next one up. We're going to take the center chunk of the tuna and parent it to the top. And now you'll see that if we rotate the top, the whole thing moves. If we rotate the second one, the second and the third one move, and we're starting to get what we're looking for. Okay, so we'll just hide that parenting column, and what we're going to do is create a keyframe for rotation, and we'll go to the tail first and just hit R for rotation, and it's the Y rotation that we're going to be keyframing. And at frame 0, create a keyframe, and let's type in -15. And then we're going to go all the way to the last keyframe and type in and just create a keyframe here, or -15. Then we're going to go to frame 20 and we're going to type in +15. And what that gives us is this back and forward movement, which is what we want. And we'll do the same to the second layer. Bring up R at frame 0, create a keyframe. We'll do the same again, only this time we'll go -20. And at the end, we'll click another keyframe, -20, and in the center here, we'll go 20. And that's working fine. And what we can actually do is on the top head part, we'll bring up the rotation and we'll click a keyframe on frame 0 and we'll put in -3 and we'll go to the end, click a keyframe, and then at frame 20 we'll go +3. And that's just going to give us a little bit of subtle movement in the body there. And that's going to work okay. Now we could spend some extra time offsetting the keys a little bit, but for now I think it's going to be okay. So the first thing we'll do before we leave this animation is select our 3 rotation layers, and then we'll go Animation, Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease, and that just turns the keyframes into Easy Ease keyframes, so they're a little smoother, and that'll help the sell the motion a little bit better. And that's it for the tuner animation. So the next thing we need to do is create a school of tuner. So we'll go Composition, New Composition, and we'll call this School. We'll call it Tuner School. And we want to make it a preset of widescreen PAL D1. Actually, crank that down a little bit. Go NTSC widescreen, square pixels, something like that's fine. 720 401 I'm going to be using, but you can use whatever you want. I like to work in 25 frames because I'm from a PAL zone of the world. 270 frames long, and click OK. And what we'll do is just bring from our projects menu our tuner into the project and switch off the eye. We don't need it visible. We're going to create a new solid, and we're going to call this School Particles. Comp size is fine. And we're going to bring up our effects panel. I like to right click on the effects panel, trap code particular, and the first thing we'll do is set up our particle type in the particle pull down as custom, and the layer as our tuner. Now you'll see they're quite small there, so we can amend our size a little bit. Take our size up to about here, and now we'll play with the emitter a little bit. So go to the emitter pull down, and we'll just get our creation happening first. In the particles per second, click a keyframe at frame 0 and type in about 500. Then we're going to go 1 frame over to frame 1, and we're going to wind that down to 0, and that means that they'll just be created at the first frame. Now notice they're disappearing there. What we need to do is, first of all, we want to change our time sampling to random loop, and that'll stop them from disappearing, but they're disappearing further along because of the particles, the life. We need to increase that to an amount that's beyond the time of the entire composition. Now they're zooming out, we don't want that, so let's go back to our emitter, get rid of all the velocity, 0 on velocity, 0 for velocity random, and 0 for velocity from emitter. And we're going to change our emitter type to a sphere, and we're going to blow our sphere out about so wide, almost as wide as the comp, and high, not quite as high, and the Z we're really going to wind it out, so give it about 1600 on the Z. Now we're going to move our position further away so that the closest fish is about that large in shot, and let's just move it down slightly about here, given that we're going to have some surface detail happening at the top here. Now the way we're going to animate these across our scene is using wind. So if you go all the way to the end of the comp and come down to our physics and our wind, just type in our X wind, say -50 to start with. The wind has disappeared, but there it is. And you'll notice that it's gone to the left here, but at the start, so the wind is actually driving our particles across from right to left. So what we need to do is go to our frame 1 and back up to emitter. We're going to move our emitter off the page to about there, so that we've just got a couple of fish on there. And we're going to go to the end and increase our wind, or decrease in the negative, until we're about there. And that way we have our fish moving across the stage there. Couple more things that we'll do in here. The size, let's bring the size down slightly, but let's bring the size random up to about 45, and let's bring that size, that's probably okay. And the last thing we're going to do, if I just zoom in here a little bit, we're going to introduce a little bit of drop off invisibility. So if you bring up your invisibility in the particular and slide in the far vanish until the furthest fish start to pop on and off. So that's it there, about 2300. And then slide down far start fade value until they start to fade off, and that's it about there. And what that does is just gives us some depth, and we're looking pretty good for now. So let's leave the tuna school. We'll come back to that in a moment. Let's bring up a new composition. I'm going to type master comp, and we'll leave that same 72401 square pixels 25. Click OK to that, and the first thing we need to do is create a background. So we'll select layer, new, solid, we'll call it BG, and in that layer we're going to generate a ramp, and we're going to make it a radial ramp, and the black swatch we're going to turn into a green aqua, quite dark out there, and the white swatch we're going to turn into the same green aqua but almost completely black, and that's going to be fine. Now the next thing we need to do is create our noise for the surface. So if we go layer, new, solid, and call it surface noise, click OK, and we're going to pre-comp this layer before we put anything in it. So if we go layer, pre-compose, and surface, we'll turn to surface noise. So we'll call it the surface noise comp, and open new composition, click OK. And we'll just rename this layer to surface noise. And what we need to do is create an effect of noise, fractal noise, and we're going to go into the transform, and we'll turn off uniform scaling, and we'll scale the width out a bit and scale the height down, something like that, and we'll increase the contrast a bit, and the brightness, knock it back a little bit more contrast, maybe bring the brightness up slightly, something about there, and that looks pretty good. Probably reduce the scale of it slightly. There we go, and also with the scale height, bring it in, and that's looking pretty good. Now if we go to the evolution setting, I want you to alt click on evolution, which brings up our expression, and we're going to type in time times 100. And what you'll see there now, if I play that back, is a little bit of noise moving. We can probably increase that a little bit. Let's go 150 on that. 150, and that's fine. So the next thing we need to do with this is to add some turbulent displace. So with the layer selected, we'll click a new effect of distort turbulent displace, and you'll see it's made a wavy displacement. We're going to bring the size down a little bit. Something like that's fine. You want enough waves but not too many, and the amount just down slightly. And we're going to type in the evolution, alt click on the stopwatch, time times 150, and that's going to give us a little bit of motion there. Let's just reduce that from 150 to about 75, and that's fine. And the next thing we need to do is just a little bit of animation on the turbulent offset. So click a keyframe at frame 0 and just move it to the left, and then in the end frame we're just going to move it a little bit to the right, and that just helps sell the effect a little bit. And I think while we're here, what we can do is just wire the fractal noise offset in the transform. So if I just slide up a little further, what we've got here is the fractal noise offset turbulence here, and the offset turbulence for the displacement here. We're just going to alt click on the stopwatch and use the pick whip and drag down to the offset for the turbulence, and then at the end we'll type times 0.5, and that'll allow us to halve the amount of the other value. So that's fine. Just slide all these up. So now we've got our turbulence. We've got our turbulence happening for displacement, and we've also got our turbulence happening in the fractal noise, and together that should just give us our wave animation. So let's go back to our master comp. Actually, just before we leave, we'll create a new solid, and we'll call this waves white. That'll do. And make it a white solid. Click OK. Drag it below the surface noise. Just bring up your toggle switches here, and we're going to use a luma matte on that. And if I switch on my transparency, you'll see that the black areas have disappeared there. Just make sure that that was black. Yes, it is. Okay, so now if we go back to our master comp, we're going to turn our surface noise comp into a 3D layer. We're going to rotate it around 90 degrees, and then we're going to slide it up to about there, and we'll scale it out just slightly widthways. Now if we just go back into our surface noise comp for a moment, we're going to select our waves white, and we're going to give it an ellipse mask. So double click on the ellipse tool, bring up our mask settings, and give it a little feather, and expand it in slightly, something like that. What you want, if you go back to the master, is you don't want to see any hard edges on the side of that. So if I slide it back, you shouldn't see any hard edges, and that's going to work fine. Something there is fine. Scale in a little bit, show you what that looks like. And that's going to work fine.